In today's video, we're going to be picking every single Week 12 college football game, as usual, using this beautiful website, Playoff Predictors. And on the home stretch of the season, the stakes are higher than ever. We've got a full, loaded Week 12 slate. I always look forward to recording this video. It's my favorite part of the week. And if you enjoy this content and you're not subscribed, you might not even realize it. So go ahead and subscribe, like, do whatever you want, especially if you enjoy the video and you don't want to miss these every single week. But let's just get right into it. We've already had 3 MACtion games go down earlier this week. On Tuesday, I actually gave out some best bets for these. 2 of them hit. One of them was a bad beat with Buffalo and Ball State going into overtime. We had Buffalo -4. They win by 3. But shout out to Bowling Green. Scott Loeffler's squad, definitely still a contender in the MAC. Pete Lembo's Buffalo squad able to stop what was a bit of a slide there against a Ball State team that was needing a victory, and then Toledo getting the home victory over Central Michigan. I also think Jim McElwain could be a guy whose name we start to hear in hot seat conversations. I put him on my hot seat rankings last week, and almost forgot to touch on Western Michigan. Still having a great season, a resurgence season. They still are looking for that last win to get them to bowl eligibility. But as we record this video, we are on Wednesday before any of these 3 games kick off, I should say. So we can actually go ahead and pick these games here. However, they will be finished by the time this video goes up on Thursday. So we've got Kent State on the road versus Miami of Ohio. This is the worst MAC team versus the best MAC team, and I think that's going to be reflected between the white lines. I could see Kent State keeping this from becoming a mega blowout, maybe playing a little bit inspired, but it's still going to be Miami of Ohio. I believe the spread is around 30.5 in this game. Akron goes on the road to Northern Illinois. Joe Moorhead's squad has actually had a few inspiring performances this season, but NIU is a team that overall just better, just more talented. There's no reason they won't win this game by a couple scores at home. Eastern Michigan goes on the road to play Ohio. Ohio's been a really fun story. Tim Albin's squad doing really well in a season where people didn't expect that. However, I think Chris Creighton's Eastern Michigan team, just out of purely being the more talented team, will go on the road and get a surprising victory here. This is MAC play, and I don't think we're going to go through a slate with just a completely clean all favorites win. I think we'll see a dog win here, and that'll be Eastern Michigan. Just a couple weeks ago, we saw a ton of underdogs win in the MAC, so the chaos is still there, and I think Eastern Michigan will foster some of that. So we get past Wednesday to Thursday. East Carolina travels on the road to play Tulsa. And, you know, the Pirates haven't been playing terrible since they fired Mike Houston, and I think they get a win here on the road versus Tulsa, and that might get them to bowl eligibility. I'm not quite completely sure with East Carolina. I would have to double check on that one, but would certainly be another nice win as they start to maybe find their footing a little bit toward the end of the season here. We've got Wyoming on the road versus Colorado State. Colorado State, they're playing extremely well. This is a Friday game. I think they should have no worries dispatching a Wyoming team that's been a bitter disappointment this season. And the Rams, well on their way and very close to being a team that punches their ticket to the Mountain West title game, which would be a shame for UNLV, a team that's right there, feels like they should be in. The only difference between them and Colorado State is that Colorado State didn't play Boise State this season, and that will ultimately be the difference. And that's the trade-off that happens when you have the Oregon State-Washington State scheduling agreement this year. Only 7 Mountain West Conference games being played by those guys. So we've got North Texas on the road versus UTSA. An interesting battle. UTSA we watched beat Memphis a couple of weeks ago. They've kind of really surged in the back half of the season here, and it's nice to see Jeff Traylor kind of get some more momentum into their sails and win in their sails. And North Texas has had a lot of big games like this where they just have not been up to the task. It really looked like Eric Morris's squad was capable of rounding a corner this year, but I actually think UTSA is going to continue to ride that wave and get a nice home victory here over the Mean Green. UCLA goes on the road to Washington. Tough game in Seattle. Washington is the team that's on a little bit more of a skid right now. UCLA is the team that is riding some momentum off for a couple nice wins, but I do think Washington, being the more talented team, being at home, having that home field advantage, they'll get a nice win in a Friday game. But this one certainly could end up being pretty entertaining, and look forward to seeing who ends up coming out on top of that one, because both teams I think are feeling really different about where they are. Washington at 5-4 feels like this season's kind of been a disappointment. UCLA at 4-5 probably feels like this season is starting to become something they didn't think it was going to be, which is actually a solid year. But give me the Huskies at home. Houston goes on the road to play Arizona. This is the last Friday game. Very interesting. Arizona absolutely on a skid right now under Brent Brennan. It's been a nightmare stretch for them. And Houston, it's been a dream stretch for them. They're on a nice winning streak. They just beat Kansas State. They've gotten several Big 12 wins that many people didn't expect them to get. And so I think they'll continue to ride that wave. I think they'll get a surprising victory on the road versus Arizona this week and kind of shock the Wildcats in Tucson. We've got Utah on the road versus Colorado. The Buffaloes, a team that before the season would have been looking at this game as a potential chance to upset Utah. Instead, it's can Utah upset Colorado? I'm going to go definitely not. I like Colorado as the home team here, getting the victory and stopping the Utes from doing anything crazy. We've got Ohio State on the road versus Northwestern. I don't think there's any chance Northwestern beats the Buckeyes here. Ohio State does have the Indiana game to look forward to. Maybe they get caught looking ahead early. Maybe this is a sloppy game initially, but Northwestern just doesn't have the talent. This one, I believe, is at Wrigley Field, if I'm not mistaken. I know they've been playing at a lot of weird spots with no stadium this year, and I believe our last couple conference games are in Wrigley Field. We've got Tulane on the road versus Navy. Tulane's a team that just made an appearance in the college football playoff ranking. That's pretty cool for John Summerall's team in their first season, and I think they're going to prove that they are very deserving of their ranking on the road versus Navy. I think they're going to torch the midshipmen, and Navy did have a really inspired performance last week, but Tulane is just next level. I think Tulane's going to win the American. I think they're going to be ultimately what ends up stopping the Army Black Knights, and so I like Tulane in this game. Clemson on the road versus Pitt, top 25 battle. Maybe not anymore, actually. I'm pretty sure Pitt was dropped from the CFP. I don't pay a ton of attention to that, admittedly. But Clemson, I think it's the win for Pitt. The mask just started to slip last week. They lose to a not very good Virginia team. And you start to look back at some of their wins and realize they needed a lot of late-game heroics, a lot of come-from-behind victories, and they could very easily be like a 4-loss team at this point. Instead, they're a 2-loss team, which is kudos to that team for figuring out ways to win. But Clemson, just a better team that got their best win of the season last week versus Virginia Tech. I think they get the job done on the road versus Pitt. Texas goes on the road to play Arkansas. It's been called Fayette-Nam by some. It's a place nobody wants to play in the SEC. Tennessee went there and learned that the hard way earlier in the season. Arkansas knocking them off. Are they capable of doing it to Texas? I don't think so. I think the Longhorns are a team that I've said a lot. There are so many ways they can beat you, and I just don't think Sarkisian's team is susceptible to a loss like this, and they haven't really been close to it. They lost to Georgia in a game where Georgia just stepped up and played incredibly well, especially on defense, and Arkansas, I just don't think has that gear against a team of Texas's caliber to be able to do that, but the Hogs will have an opportunity to get bowl eligibility against Louisiana Tech, I believe, next week. Liberty goes on the road to play UMass. And what's kind of an interesting little game here, Liberty hasn't played well on the road this season. UMass is a team that can win these kind of weird games, especially just making teams travel to their place. But I'm going to take Liberty just because this UMass team this year isn't very good. But, I mean, think back to last season. They beat a New Mexico State team, and that New Mexico State team ended up being really good, and that was a top-tier CUSA team. So UMass has been able to do these kinds of weird things before, and who knows? They could, have won a couple of more games if they were in the CUSA this season, rather than being an independent that is forced to play, a little bit of a tougher schedule. And I'd say the MAC is probably a step above the CUSA, which takes us to this next game. Louisiana Tech at Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky, top 2 team in the CUSA, I think gets the win over Louisiana Tech. A Louisiana Tech team that has been playing really well. They've been figuring some stuff out under Sonny Cumbie. Could have been a signature win, potentially a job-saving win over Jacksonville State that they choked late. So maybe they play some inspired football. Maybe they can get an encore performance, but it kind of felt like that was the exception to the rule. That is a not very good Louisiana Tech team. ULM on the road versus Auburn. Can the Warhawks be the second year in a row to go on the road and beat an Auburn team and embarrass them? Maybe it could happen. ULM's been playing inspired football. They're definitely a team that's more bought in than Auburn is at this point in the season. It feels like it's a very dejected Auburn squad, but it just feels like they'll be woken up enough to not fall for the same pitfall that they fell for last season, which is losing this type of a game late in the season. But it is an interesting one to keep an eye on for sure. We've got Coastal Carolina on the road versus Marshall, the Thundering Herd, a team that is going to be really up for this game. They're on a nice winning streak in the Sun Belt, and Charles Huff's squad still has all their goals in front of them. Coastal saw a lot of their goals fall apart on a tough losing streak. I actually think Tim Beck's squad's going to get up for this one, get a nice bounce-back victory here on the road versus Marshall. This is the week where the SEC lines up on some cupcakes. So Kentucky's going to play Murray State. They'll get the win there. But again, I'll remind you as we pick some of these games, an FCS team has defeated a power conference team every season since I believe it's 2009. It's the stat I throw around all the time, and it still hasn't happened this season. So if it doesn't happen over these next couple of weeks where these games are happening, the streak will be over, and it'll be a pretty nuts streak that comes to a close. So Bama over Mercer's another one. I don't think Mercer really has a shot there. But here we got another CUSA battle. FIU on the road versus Jacksonville State. No one is playing better in the CUSA than Jacksonville State. Rich Rod squad's going to get another victory, continue to roll. I have no doubt they will be in the CUSA Conference Championship game. Florida Atlantic at Temple, another one. FAU, Tom Herman squad needs this win basically to keep his job. They're winless in the American. They might have already made up their minds. He might already be as good as gone. And Stan Drayton's Temple team is a team that I have no doubt is still bought in. They've won a couple of games this season, and he's also kind of coaching for his job. So it's an interesting battle. I'm going to still take FAU to win. It's kind of a long distance to travel, though, so just keep an eye on that storyline there. But moving on, we've got Michigan State on the road versus Illinois. The Fighting Illini have definitely had their dream season sort of crumble a little bit. They were off to a really nice start. Now they've got 3 losses. Michigan State is a team that it feels like has sort of aged kind of poorly down the stretch here of the season. And so I think Illinois will get the win. Still a team that's outperforming their expectations. Bielema's squad has been pleasantly surprising defensively. And to be fair, Michigan State's has as well. But the quarterback stuff, Aiden Childs benched recently, it just feels like Illinois is the team to rock with here. A little bit more continuity and a little bit more players bought in, which at this point in the season I think is a relevant thing to look at. Sam Houston goes on the road to play Kennesaw State. Weirder things have happened, especially in the CUSA. Could Kennesaw State shock a Sam Houston team that's been playing kind of sketchy down the stretch? I don't think so. I think Sam Houston will get another nice victory, which would be nuts. I believe this gets them to 8-2 on the year, which is pretty disgusting considering where they were last season. And so Casey Keeler still there. Kennesaw State will have an interim leading them this one. They fired Brian Bohannon, which I found interesting because of Sam Houston as a case study. They went 3-9 last season, looked about as bad as Kennesaw State did, and yet they've completely turned things around under Casey Keeler. So just an interesting contrast here, but maybe the interim coach gets Kennesaw State up and they play well. We'll see. Sometimes that happens. We've seen that happen a couple times. We saw Rice do that and beat Navy earlier this season. This would be a similar tier of upset, I would say. Syracuse on the road versus Cal. Cal is a team that's playing really hot. They profile really well. Syracuse kind of trending in the wrong direction. McCord becoming a little bit more turnover prone down the stretch. Fran Brown, I don't know if he's going to be able to take a shower after this one. As he said after their loss last week to Boston College, he couldn't take a shower because showers are for winners. So give me Cal at home. We've got Hawaii at Utah State. The Rainbow Warriors quietly have been playing really well down the stretch here. They nearly took out a good UNLV team last week. But in this case, in this instance, I think they'll get another win. I think they will take out Utah State on the road. Utah State, a team that's been kind of floundering, kind of aimless this season. They lost their coach just prior to the year. And so there's not a ton of takeaways I have there. Oregon State, man, they are absolutely sputtering. Lost to San Jose State last week. It was an ugly, sloppy game on the road versus an Air Force squad that is figuring it out. They just beat Fresno State, and give me Air Force at home. I think that Oregon State skid is just going to continue to happen, and it's just really sad to see a team that early in the season was looking kind of promising, but a lot of their wins haven't aged great, and it's becoming increasingly obvious that there's a lot more to rebuild at Oregon State down the stretch here after what happened to them, and I think it's been a pretty inexcusably bad season. Yes, it is your first year if you're Trent Bray, but losing to a first-year coach in Nevada and San Jose State in the same season, it's pretty bad. They're probably going to miss a bowl game, and if they lose this one, it drops them to 4-6. The only way to make a bowl game is to beat Washington State and Boise State down the stretch, so probably not going to happen. Virginia travels on the road to play Notre Dame, the Fighting Irish, a team that has to play Virginia, fresh off of an upset over Pitt, and I do think that was a combination of Virginia playing well and Pitt being a slightly overrated team. I really like what Calandria brings to this offense. I liked him all offseason, and I'm glad that he's doing well, but I think the Fighting Irish will lock in and get another home victory here. They've clearly just been a different team down the stretch. It's been really cool to watch that team grow under Marcus Freeman this season. Penn State goes on the road to play a lifeless Purdue squad. I don't even give this one a second thought. Purdue is not good at all. I honestly think Ryan Walters has to go in just his second season because of how bad this is. If you let him stick around, things could get pretty toxic headed into next season. Boston College on the road versus SMU. I think the Eagles will quickly find out this is not the same SMU team. They played in a bowl game last season. Rhett Lashley's squad going to get another win, continue to roll. They are right there in that playoff picture. You win and you're in. That is the message for SMU. Keep making it happen, and I think they will against a Boston College team that's dealing with some drama. Castellanos just entered the transfer portal. If they run into any issues with their quarterback they've got in now, they're not going to have their safety valve of Castellanos that can come in. So we'll see how that impacts Boston College as they try to navigate their schedule here. We've got Louisville on the road versus Stanford. Stanford has just not been as inspiring as I hoped maybe they could be in Troy Taylor's second season. I was kind of hoping to see a little bit more growth down the stretch, reasons to believe in them, but Louisville's playing really well. There's a reason they're a top 25 team right now. I think they get another nice win in ACC play on the road versus Stanford. I know there's travel stuff. I know there's other logistical things to keep in mind here, but I honestly don't think those things will affect Louisville in this spot. LSU goes on the road to play Florida. This is just not the same Florida team we saw at the beginning of the year. They are battered, they are bruised, they are beaten up. And LSU is a team that, coming off a blowout loss to Alabama, I think they'll be wired. I think they'll be awake. I think they'll be ready. They'll probably be a little battered as well. But I still think they're together enough to get a win here. Brian Kelly, still a good coach that I think will have his team ready and still believing that they have a shot at the playoff, even if that's not necessarily the case. I think LSU will still show up and perform against Florida, get the win in the Swamp against the Gators, a Gators team that has been playing really hard down the stretch. South Florida goes on the road to play Charlotte, the 49ers. Very disappointing this season. Looked like Poji's squad could maybe turn things around in the early part of the season. They were playing teams hard. They got a couple nice wins, but South Florida, I just think, is a better team coming off a pretty disheartening loss to Navy. I think Alex Golish will get a bounce-back victory here. And for South Florida, battling to get into a bowl game, a little bit below where their expectations, I think, were this season. They were kind of hoping to take the next step. But if you look at their schedule, they just did play a really tough schedule. Their losses to Tulane and to Navy, I mean, those are tough teams they played. They had to play Bama. They had to play Miami. So the record might indicate a worse season than they actually had this season. Troy at Georgia Southern, James Madison and Old Dominion, a pair of Sun Belt matchups. Georgia Southern has been so pleasantly surprising. It's a Troy team that we saw get a really nice win over Coastal Carolina a couple weeks ago, and Jared Parker finding some things that work for that team this season. But I just think Georgia Southern, led by Clay Helton, former USC legend, is going to continue to find ways to win. And by the way, Georgia Southern's third-string quarterback, he's named Tyler Budge, and pretty good at football. I'm calling it. He's going to win the Heisman someday. So we've got James Madison on the road against Old Dominion. I think Old Dominion's playing better than most teams in the Sun Belt right now. I think that defense will step up and shut down a prolific James Madison offense. This is one I'm actually really excited about over in the Sun Belt, and I think Old Dominion can really shake things up by beating Bob Chesney's squad that has been pretty underrated, I think. I think people have sort of slept on and forgot about this team after they took a couple losses, after like that ULM loss. They still only have 2 on the season, so they could still make a lot of noise out there in the Sun Belt. Nebraska has to go on the road to play USC. I mean, it's about who's going to continue their slide here. I think USC gets a win, a close win maybe at home. Nebraska's been bitterly disappointing down the stretch. I still think that they're on schedule for Matt Rule, but man, it really looked like they were way ahead of schedule earlier in the season after they blew out Colorado, but things have sort of collapsed down the stretch. They've lost some nightmarish games. That one to UCLA was really, really bad. I think USC gets the win here. There's still a lot of things to like about the way USC is playing, the way they're keeping games close, the way they're playing defense, but they just haven't been able to finish this season, and they just have a significantly, I think, lower ceiling, or maybe you could argue it's a lower floor this year with the style change that they're trying to do at USC, which is different than what we've typically seen under Lincoln Riley, and we'll see what happens for them in that game. Baylor goes on the road to play West Virginia, 2 of the hottest teams in the Big 12. And if I told you that a month ago, you would have thought I was crazy, but it is now true. They're both playing extremely well. I think West Virginia and Neil Breezy get a nice home victory here against a Baylor team that has found their offensive identity. So give me the Mountaineers. The Big 12 has been as chaotic and as good and as amazing as advertised in every aspect. And I think this game is a great representation of why both of these teams, you could have argued, were either dead in the water or just not very good, and now they're both looking like they're on a pretty good spot at the end of the year. Missouri on the road versus South Carolina. This is going to be a splattering. Missouri's going to get absolutely cooked in this game. It's going to look very similar to the Texas A&M game. I don't know how Missouri keeps finding ways to win. Oklahoma's not a very good team this year. That's no secret. That last game was very sloppy, ugly. South Carolina's playing extremely well. I think they're just going to beat the brakes off of Missouri. This game will be over by halftime. Arkansas State on the road versus a Georgia State team that's lifeless. Arkansas State did just get battered by Louisiana last week, but I think they get a nice bounce-back victory, and Rayner makes something happen. Georgia State loses at home. That's what I think will happen there. And another Sun Belt matchup. We're back to the Big Ten. Rutgers on the road versus Maryland. Maryland has kind of had Rutgers' number since they've been in the Big Ten, and I think it's going to happen again. I think they're going to beat a Rutgers team that just hasn't been playing as good of football. They did find a way to gut out a victory over Minnesota last week, which was a really impressive performance and a good show of resilience by Greg Schiano's squad, but Maryland's been the type of team that's been able to dig deep and find some wins in unlikely places this season, and it just feels like Rutgers, after a couple physical games, having to go on the road to College Park, Maryland, to a team that's actually owned them. I think Maryland gets the victory here. Arizona State on the road versus Kansas State. The Wildcats, a team that's still looking to contend in the Big 12. But guess what? So are the Sun Devils. Miraculously, this team's still in it as well. And ASU's been playing really good football. Kenny Dillingham's staff, I said at the beginning of the season, I think is one of the most underrated staffs in the country. Brian Ward, the defensive coordinator there, just an absolute menace. And it's really showed this season. And I think if they get Cam Scatterbo back, which all indications say they will, I think they can pull off an unlikely upset on the road against a Kansas State team that's been too inconsistent to fully trust this season. So give me the Sun Devils in that game. Boise State on the road versus San Jose State. This one, a trap game. It is a weird stadium. Shefku Stadium is weird. It's one of the smallest in the FBS. There's a reason teams lose there all the time that shouldn't lose there. And Kenny Amatulolo has a good squad in his first season that has been winning football games. They're bowl eligible already. They're playing with house money, and they're playing a top 25 team. They will be inspired. They will be ready, but Boise State is next level. The Broncos will get this victory on the road. I think Genty will step up and make the plays necessary to win, but just a little bit sketchy. If you're the Broncos, take a deep breath. I think it's a little bit sketchy. Southern Miss on the road versus Texas State. Bobcats should annihilate a team that's been operating with no head coach, hasn't been playing well. They've been getting blown out a lot. They're one of the worst teams in the Sun Belt. I'd say easily the worst team in the Sun Belt right now, because even Troy is showing signs of life now. Southern Miss, bottom of the barrel. They're going to get smoked by Texas State, a team that I don't think is alive anymore in the Sun Belt title race. I might have to double check, but I'm pretty sure they're clearly out of it. And it's because of this team, Louisiana, beating them head-to-head. Louisiana has no Sun Belt losses, and I think they'll keep that up this week against the South Alabama squad that has been hot and cold this season. They've really surprised me in a lot of areas with how they've been able to compete in these games. But Louisiana is just too good this season. I think South Alabama has more holes than them, and I think that those will get exposed by the Raging Cajuns, who are still hoping for a college football playoff spot, and that is the era we currently live in. Tennessee on the road versus Georgia. We've got a couple goodies all layered here at the bottom. Georgia has been a team that has been inconsistent. You cannot trust them not to turn the football over. Carson Beck has just been throwing the ball like a maniac and in a bad way. The defensive front has been inconsistent at best this season, and I do think they'll actually show up in this game. I think they'll expose the Tennessee offense that's been pretty inconsistent. This one could get sloppy and ugly. I've heard Nico Iamaleava will not play for Tennessee this week, and that is one of the deciding factors for a bounce-back Georgia victory. And all those people that were calling me Georgia haters last week, guess what? Ole Miss actually ended up beating Georgia, so that was the correct pick, and I'm picking Georgia here because I'm not a Georgia hater, so you're welcome. Oregon goes on the road to play Wisconsin. The Ducks have really thrived in the Big Ten. These types of games versus lesser opponents have not mattered at all because the Ducks have just taken care of business. It's never been in doubt. Ironically, the ones that have been the most in doubt were the ones versus Boise State and Idaho, which is nuts. But these mid to lower level Big Ten teams this year, Ducks have had no issues with. In a game that I would have labeled a trap game just a few weeks ago, I won't label that because the Ducks have continued to win on the road. Wisconsin has kind of slipped a little, a blowout loss to Iowa layered in there. They're not as threatening of a team now. New Mexico State on the road versus Texas A&M. Can the Aggies do it again against the Aggies? Against an SEC team on the road late in the season? I'm going to say no. Clearly a way worse New Mexico State team this season that is not going to make a bowl game, not going to do a lot. I think they made the wrong hire, and I think they're just in a difficult position. Give me the Aggies to win, obviously. Much better than last year's Auburn team. Cincinnati goes on the road to play Iowa State. The Cyclones kind of on a slide here. I think they'll get a bounce-back victory at home. Part of that is I just think Kansas is playing really good football right now, so they just exposed Iowa State in a way that not many teams are capable of doing, and I don't think Cincinnati's capable of doing that. They're still battling for that 6th win, that bowl eligibility clinching win. Wake Forest on the road versus North Carolina. Not a game I put a ton of thought into this week because it's kind of slipped under the radar, but at the end of the day, North Carolina's been super interesting, kind of bipolar. Wake Forest battled with a good Cal team, so I actually think they can go on the road here and get a win. Dave Clawson's squad been pretty scrappy and has sort of fought and battled to avoid being labeled as a team that's just in a downward spiral after last season. And I really think even though they could still miss a bowl game, they could still technically finish like 4-8 this season. I think he's instilled a little bit more faith into this administration that he can be the guy going forward. Because he's been there for so long, they're obviously more willing to trust him and hear him out. And I think he's shown some things with the squad this year and outperformed their talent level a little bit. That's enough. If they get this win, I think that'll be more than enough. It'll get them to 5-5 with 3 ACC wins, and I think they can continue to build in the right direction, get back to sort of that ceiling they reached under Sam Hartman where they made an ACC title game. UAB goes on the road to play Memphis. UAB, they did compete versus UConn last week, but this is a quick turnaround. They got to go on the road. They got to play a Memphis team that's going to be upset and angry and hungry. I don't think they're capable of pulling off a crazy upset. Again, Trent Dilfer on his way out, in my opinion. This is sketchy. Washington State goes on the road to play New Mexico. Bronco Mendenhall's New Mexico team has been playing quietly, really good. They got a nice victory last week. I just think this is a dangerous game and a dangerous team to play at this point in the season. For Washington State, I know there's a common refrain of couging it, losing in a big spot, losing a big game, whatever it is. A lot of people pointing out that, hey, if Washington State wins out, they could have a legitimate shot at being a college football playoff team. And so I actually think New Mexico steps up and just pulls off a shocker. It's going to be a weird night game, Pac-12 after dark, if you want to call it that. I think the Cougs are just going to find a way to randomly and terribly lose this game, and it's going to be really sad because I myself am a Pac-2 guy. So I think it'll be sad, and I think it'll happen. And let's just continue to rock with the upsets. I don't think there's many teams in the Big 12 playing better than Kansas is right now. The Jayhawks have found their explosivity on offense. They have really figured it out. Things are clicking. They lit up Iowa State. I don't think it was a fluke. BYU has been playing very poor football over the last couple of weeks. It is bound to come up and bite them. I think they are going to get shocked in Provo. I think Kansas is going to take an early lead, and they're going to just be absolutely flabbergasted. And I think Kansas is going to win this football game, and I'm rocking with it. I'm being accused of being a BYU hater already. I can hear it. I might as well embrace it. I think Kansas is going to pull the crazy upset. And then last but not least, San Diego State goes on the road to play UNLV. I think UNLV gets a nice victory at home after their scare they had on the islands in Hawaii. San Diego State has not been a great team this season. I do think Sean Lewis is the right guy long term, but this year they clearly don't have it. So there it is, a pick for every single Week 12 game. Let me know down in the comments which picks you agree with, which picks you disagree with, what you would change if you were picking these games here. I'll include the link to this website as usual down below, but let me know down in the comments what game you're most excited for this weekend, and that's all I got for you guys, so I will see you guys next week.